Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Zodiac Bandit, and today we have some spoilers for Critical Role in general, but Campaign 3, Downfall, and like I said, in general, still Campaigns 1 and 2. So if you aren't caught up with any of that, I recommend you click off. So yeah, let's get started. So last Thursday was the first episode of Critical Role Downfall, or Campaign 3, Episode 99, and it was incredible, in my opinion. I've had a couple of days to sit and stew on it and really think back about a lot of the ideas and a lot of the stuff that happened within the episode, and it is incredible. Back when I first watched it, I gave it like a 7.5 or an 8 out of 10, and now I'm thinking it's more like an 8.5 to 9 out of 10. I thought it was a fantastic episode, and a bunch of stuff happened within. However, some people are somewhat lost and confused on a lot of the concepts that were within some of the video. Like, I had a million questions about what was going on in general, what's the plan, what's the plot, what's going on. So I thought today would be a good reason to just sort of talk about that. Go over what I've thought about the episode and sort of the stuff that happened within. I did do the recap and I did briefly talk about what I thought at the end, but I do think it makes a good idea to sort of talk about it again here in a lot more detail. So that's what I'm going to do. So the first 40 minutes to an hour, I forget exactly how long it was, of the episode started and took place in a totally different realm slash reality than the normal Exandrian one, right? So it started off in a place called the palace known as Tengar, which is like a place of infinite possibility. That's why all of the beings in this place are like little beings of light. Whether or not they're actually little beings, we don't know, but some of them were rather small compared to other beings of light. So in this place is like infinite possibility. There's a quill that is constantly writing stuff that is yet to be and may never be sort of thing. And there's just infinite void surrounding this whole place by the sounds of things. And everyone's just a light being. And in this realm, a new tree was born and it was all gnarled and messed up. And seemingly one of the leaders, or one of these balls of light that were like the leaders, grabbed like the fruit that came off of it, and then a point of lightlessness or nothingness sort of just appeared. And to sort of tie this all back into campaign 3, a lot of people suspect that this nothingness, this lightlessness, was Predathos, which is like why the gods would be so fearful of them. And to sort of get to that in a minute, after that, the lights all sort of hopped on a sort of spaceship or a light ship and then entered Exandrian space. They entered like the real prime material plane, and then slowly each of them became the gods. So all of these little light forms, or a handful of these light forms, were played by some of the player characters. So Nick played Aru, who eventually became Peller, the Dawnfather, one of the gods of Exandria. And then Ashley, who played Luce, became Saren Ray. Talzin played Ash, became Melora, the Wild Mother. Nosir played Edem, became Arathis. Abu Bakar played Koru, became Corellin. And Laura played Nala, who became the Raven Queen's predecessor. So whoever the god of death was in Exandria before the Raven Queen became, or sorry, the goddess of death or the passage of death, that is who Laura's character became. Now, there were other NPC light forms that were there, but the only one that we have like concrete evidence of who they became was Emery, who became Asmodeus. So, that's interesting. But there was two more light forms that we had names for. There was Shasti and there was Ihana, the Weaver of Time. Those are the two other named lights that we know of. But there had to be more lights than just them on this ship, because there are 21 gods in the pantheon for Critical Role. So there needs to be more, right? There has to be more on there. These are just the player characters and a handful of like the light balls that were with them. So yeah. However, it is likely that the Weaver of Time did become Ioun, because that just makes sense, right? Like, this Weaver of Time becomes something that's all about knowing everything. So that makes a lot of sense to me that she became Ioun. So yeah, those are all like the confirmed ones that we have so far about what they were before and then what they turned into. So yeah. So as they were escaping the nothingness in Tengar, they became the gods, and they started flying through Exandrian space and eventually landed on Exandria, where they were confronted by the Titans. That is what the ending of that was, where like they woke up and they were like surrounded by primordial beings. That is the Titans and them sort of meeting each other. That was that big, large mountain that a handful of the players saw during Campaign 3, where they made first contact. That was basically that. That moment was what we saw. And I love that we have an origin story now that is seemingly the true origin story for the gods. Now, what is really cool is, and I noticed a lot of people also noticed this, is that this story of light beings moving toward Exandria is very similar to like the Luxon. And for those who don't know, the Luxon is like was a big thing introduced in Campaign 2 where it was a light being that sort of flowed through, the space of infinity and then eventually decided to make life, make Exandria. That is what the Kryn dynasty in Campaign 2 follow. Like that is their whole thing. And the beacons hold like small shards of the Luxon's light. That is the entirety. Like there is little Aeorian like objects. Those sort of things are like based on that. And I don't know if there has been a beacon in Campaign 3. I think there might have been in the Malleus Key, but there is a handful of beacons spread around the entire world, and Ludinus wanted one in Campaign 2, and he might have had his hands on one in Campaign 3, and they're just beacons of possibility, basically. So I like the idea that the gods sort of followed the same path as the Luxon, and it's very similar just based on like the storytelling. So I wonder if the Luxon was one of the two beings of light who got sucked in by the nothingness and was sort of displaced even further in time, like before, or if like the Luxon was one of those lights and just left before everyone else. Because all of the little light beings seem to be like they wanted to do something. They all said that they wanted to figure out something, like how did this happen? I've been trying to do that sort of thing, right? That was said a handful of times throughout the opening of this. So it makes me wonder if the Luxon was one of those light beings before it came to Exandria and created Exandria. So who knows? Maybe the two stories are very similar and like people are just getting some facts wrong and the Luxon is literally just the god showing up. But that is like the whole thing about creation stories. A bunch of people change things to suit the narrative. So I'm very interested in like eventually potentially getting answers for whatever the Luxon is too. Because if we're getting god answers, maybe one day Matt will answer some questions about the Luxon. But who knows? I think this is fun to just think about. So then after the whole primordial thing where they see these massive, entities above them, we then cut to 100 years into the Calamity, which is where Downfall takes place. And we start in a town known as Hawks Hill, which is like a refugee place where a bunch of people have sort of over the last 100 years or, however long they've been involved in the Calamity, because some places wouldn't have been affected till later on. But it's like a last bastion of like hope, because it seems that Aeor comes here a lot, and a lot of people really want to go to Aeor because it seems safe, because how is that floating city still around after 100 years? So a lot of people have been like coming here and migrating here. To me, Hawks Hill seems like a reference to Seret. It just does. So, like his weapons were the hawks. He was a bird himself, which, he might have been a hawk. I don't remember what bird he was sort of based off of. But the idea of this being based on Seret, who was like the last survivor of the Ring of Brass, and then who was able to sort of aid people throughout the beginnings of the Calamity, and then they name this place after him. That just feels like it makes a lot of sense to me. But this is where we then go on to meet the player characters, who, as time goes on throughout the this first session, we learn that the player characters are all mortal incarnations of the gods, which I think is really cool and is something that I still can't believe they're allowing to happen. I can't believe Matt is allowing the players to play the gods. That to me feels like stuff that I wouldn't want, like if for me personally, I wouldn't want my players to touch, because now those players are going to give them personality traits, ideals, speaking patterns that I didn't necessarily agree with, but hey, this is their game, right? So they can go for it. I just find it to be a totally shocking idea for them to play as these characters. So anyway, most of them, actually technically all of the characters who played like a light being who became a god, the same players are playing the same gods their light beings came into being, right? Like they're the same people across the board. Talzin, who played Ash, is now Asha in like that's the mortal being that is Melora, the Wild Mother, who is now Asha, and that is Talzin's character. And Talzin was Ash, who became Melora before. So you go down the entire list, and everyone's like that. Ashley is Trist, who was Saren Ray. Nick is Aiden, who is the Dawnfather. Laura is Amira, who is the Raven Queen. Keep in mind, she is the only one, actually that's not true, but she is one of two people who don't directly play the person they became at the beginning of the game, but she played as the person who is like the successor of who she became, which is why we don't know the name of who, was before the Raven Queen, but now she is the Raven Queen, which I think is really cool. And then Abu Bakar, he is playing Salaha, who is Corellin, who was who he turned into before. And then Nosir is the Emissary, who isn't a god, but is a proxy for Arathis, which I think is really cool. Because that means not everyone here is just straight up a god, and I like that idea a lot. And the only other person who sort of gets like a confirmed this is who they are moment is later on when they actually get to Aeor, they meet Arcadia, who is Ayud. So I think this is really cool. I really like the idea of them playing mortal incarnations of the gods, and I'm very interested into seeing like what exactly they get to do with this, because it has added personality traits to the gods that I wasn't like totally sure of. Like I always felt like Melora was like a very loving, kindly, loving person, but Asha does not have that at all. Like Asha to me just seems very vengeful, which is weird for Melora, the Wild Mother. So I'm very intrigued in how all of these characters are going to sort of add to the mythos of these gods. What do they do here that make them change into the beings that we eventually know them to be? Also, something to point out for Talzin, Ashley, and Laura, they're all playing gods who they have a connection to from prior campaigns, right? Talzin's playing Melora, who Caduceus is directly connected to, right? Like that's the god he follows. Ashley is playing Saren Ray, who is Pike's god from campaign 1. And then Laura is playing the Raven Queen, who is, incredibly important throughout all of campaign 1, right? Like the Raven Queen is the god who sort of, like, I would argue has like the biggest impact on campaign 1, because Vax becomes the champion of her, and then eventually he gets taken by the Raven Queen, and that would deeply affect Vex, who was Laura's character. So also Percy followed the Raven Queen as well. But anyway, I do think it's really interesting and really cool that the main cast are playing gods they directly relate to, which is really cool to me. I haven't even begun to speak on what the goal for this game is, and that is to have the gods sneak into Aeor, which they've already done, remain hidden for a while, and then eventually destroy a god-killing weapon. Some of the gods want to keep Aeor around, some of them don't. So I didn't want to make the distinction of destroying Aeor, because some gods want to keep it around. However, we know where Aeor ends up, so we know it has to be destroyed at some point. So I guess the goal is to destroy Aeor and to destroy the god-killing weapon. Along the way, making sure the sort of research for making the god-killing weapon can't be replicated and can't be sent out to the rest of the world to be replicated. That is the goal. The goal is to destroy the god-killing weapon and make sure no one else can ever make it again. Because that is the whole reason the gods are doing what they're doing. Because it had to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 years ago, the gods learned that Aeor had the designs for something to destroy the god-killing weapon. Because all of these gods then decided they were going to become mortals. And they had to sort of grow up as mortals. They couldn't just become mortals, otherwise, the thing that stops gods from getting into Aeor would likely stop them from getting into Aeor. They had to become full-on mortals, and they all did it at different times. Arcadia seems to be the first one who did it, as she claims to be the oldest and she left first, and Aiden, who is on the lower end of everything, is the youngest and seems to be the one who most recently became a god. He's 15 to 16 from what I gather. So realistically, it is really, I just find it interesting. And one of the things that Brennan prefaced at the beginning was that the gods haven't been seen in decades, which I thought was very interesting. And then as we slowly went through the episode, it unveiled that the players are the gods and that they've lived lives for the last little bit. And these aren't just like avatars of the gods; they are the gods. They are just the mortal incarnations of the gods. And it later gets like told by Arcadia that if they were to die in these mortal forms, they would just return as their regular selves, but they won't be able to get to Aor because of the thing that is blocking them in the first place. That is why they became mortals in the first place. And then they started to live lives as this. So I love this idea. I think all of this is so cool and so interesting. And it's part of the reason why I thought like it was so fun. I really did just enjoy a lot of the stuff that happened throughout all this. Learning that the characters were the gods, learning what the goal is for these characters was really cool, and I just really, really enjoyed it. So then, after all of that, after learning the goals that they needed to deal with and everything like that, the player characters learned that there were four other gods. Four other gods who were here to help them in the same sort of way, and they also became mortals. But these gods aren't prime deities, they're betrayer gods. And this is where a lot of like the speculation is sort of coming in for my head. Who they are and what their goals are. So who the four betrayer gods are hasn't been confirmed, but there are a lot of people who seem to have like speculated and like sort of looked into their personalities, the things they've said, and have sort of come to an agreed upon consensus who they are. Because one of the things that Arcadia said at the beginning before like the two groups met was they don't have to confirm who they are. So I'm very, very, very interested into seeing exactly who they are eventually, like it getting confirmed. But these names that I'm about to list off are what is like theorized right now. So Milo, who seems to be a priest of the Dawnfather, according to what people say, is Asmodeus. And while I see where they're coming from, there was another character in my head who I thought fit Asmodeus just a little bit better. But we then move on to Umletta, who was like a halfling, who was like hiding on top of a pillar, who then slid down the pillar at the beginning of their introduction, which has led people to believe that Umletta is Lolth. I personally thought Umletta was Asmodeus. Now the reason I thought this was because of the way that Umletta was speaking. Umletta was speaking about like how the people are dirt, and then eventually the prime gods will see that and they'll be like, you'll come to our side eventually. Like, and the way that Umletta was talking just reminded me so much of the way that Asmodeus talked about humans, or just human beings, or beings in general. Mortal beings is the word I'm looking for, from Calamity. So the way that Umletta was talking just reminded me so much of Asmodeus. But, you know, Lolth also hates people, so Lolth works as well. So then the other two I was kind of less confident about of who I thought they were. Tishar, which was like a barbarian woman. A lot of people think that it's Grumsh, and I have to agree. Like, that just makes a lot of sense to me that Grumsh would be, I'm probably saying that name horribly. That makes a lot of sense for a lot of people, like the god of the orcs and stuff like that, and like a lot of orcs are barbarians and stuff, right? So it just makes a lot of sense that this massive barbarian woman is Grumsh. And then there was Zarhust, who I thought was the Chained Oblivion. I was like, this makes a lot of sense. This person is like covered with chains and hooks and just seems to be like, it looked, you know, it reminded me of, why am I, Dominox a little bit, right? Like, this turtle reminded me of Dominox with the hooks and the chains and all that sort of stuff initially. And then a lot of people said, no, it's Turog, which is the god of torture. And based on the wordings that Zarhust had throughout, like, his entire time of talking about, like, feeling pain and all that stuff and how he hasn't felt peace since he turned around and watched his world blow up. And I was like, oh yeah, this guy is straight up just Turog. It makes a lot of sense once you think about it like that. So those are what are the presumed gods for each character here, which I think is very interesting, and I'm very excited to learn eventually who they are. I'm also worried about each of them, because these four seem hell-bent on just destroying everything, which is the end goal of Aor. It has to come to that eventually. But I think these four are the reason Ludinus believes the gods are so bad. And it seems like their manipulation tactics, because they've been manipulating like the party ever since they showed up. It seems like their manipulation tactics are going to lead members of the party to agreeing with them that Aor has to be destroyed, and that is where Ludinus is going to be able to be like, "See, I told you, the gods are bad," and they might be able to, convince the actual party, the Bell's Hells, who are watching this whole thing unfold alongside of us, and he might be able to convince some members of the Bell's Hells that they're bad. That being said, there are members of the Bell's House who I don't think will be affected by this at all. Like, obviously, I don't think anything that Ludinus will ever be able to say will convince Aurum that he's on his side, and also Imogen. But then there's also now Breus, who is literally a follower of Asmodeus, so he'll just like see this entire thing happen and be like, yeah, that sounds about right. Should have destroyed that shit sooner. So I'm not too sure how well over this is gonna go for Ludinus, because as of right now, I don't think anything that like the gods have done have been horribly unreasonable. So I'm very curious exactly as to what's going to happen in the future for Ludinus to think like, see, these gods are bad. So I'm very excited to see exactly what that is. So I feel like I've covered everything that people have sort of asked in like the prior video of the recap, or like questions that people ask, like what's happening, who are the characters, what are the characters, what was the beginning about. I feel like I've answered those questions fairly well here today. So hopefully I did that really well. There is one more thing that I want to sort of talk about before I wrap up this video, and that is the role playing. The role playing here is so amazing, it's not even funny. Ashley Johnson might be the best role player in all of Critical Role. When she was hugging her family, because that her character Trist has a family back in Hawks Hill who helped her get onto the ship to bring her up to Aor. She was hugging her family. She had emotional moments with her son where he was playing poker with criminals who then gave him like a gold piece because he reminded him of his brother. And then she has a husband, and just the way like Ashley is able to convey stuff, and like it honestly made me tear up when she had to leave them behind. And I was like, that's brutal. But then there was another moment with Laura and her champion, Pervan, which I thought was really cool and really awesome to see that Pervan was still around at this point in the story. She had an emotional moment with him, like he guided her throughout her beginnings of her like mortal life, and he was there like the whole time basically, and he knew that she was looking for something, and you could feel like the hurt from Brennan. Like Brennan Lee Mulligan fucking nailed this as well, right? Like he smashed it out of the park when he was like, I can't help you anymore, which I was like, oh, that gutted me. And Laura's reaction was like kind of cold and callous. Like I was like, damn, like that's kind of rough. The way like she just sort of like was like, okay, cool, see ya. I was like, yeah, he's been helpful, but he's been a means to an end for this character. And I was like, damn. And that felt like perfect role play from Laura in that moment, which I thought was very, very cool. And I liked how each of them sort of interacted with each other. Like they've all felt like they've known each other for forever, because they have, right? They were little beings of possibility before, with the exception of Laura's character and with the exception of the emissary. But I just really just enjoyed the interactions between all of them, and the sort of disconnect between Amira, which was the Raven Queen, and the emissary to the other characters, right? Amira kept saying sister to the other characters, and they all shot her down. They're like, no, 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 you're not our sister, which is true because the Raven Queen replaced whoever their sibling was before, which I thought was really cool. And the way that they all sort of interacted with her was like kind of negative. Like the first thing that Asha said to her was, "You smell like death." That's not a fucking greeting. That's not a greeting that you would say to anybody who you like. So, and then when the main one for me was when Amira said, "Hey sister," to Arcadia, and Arcadia said, "Not sister." She stopped the conversation she was having to specifically point out that she wasn't her sister. And I thought that was brutal. But the role playing in this was so good. There were so many emotions from these characters that we barely know that got me super hard. Like in the beginning, like in the first like 2 hours before the break, there were a ton of emotional moments where characters were saying goodbye to other characters, where Aiden actively like aided people. He gave them a tent and filled it with a bunch of food and said like, if you don't get on the ship, like like, don't worry, you have this now. And then later, Aiden watched people get kicked off the ship because someone was holding a symbol of the Dawn Father. And because Aiden is the Dawn Father, he looked at this woman from across the way and gave her hope. And you could like feel that moment. And I just thought the RP was so good in this episode that I have to mention it here. It is, if you take away everything else, like if you take away like how interesting like the gods are and their dynamics and all that sort of stuff, and like the interesting like opening where like we saw the creation of the gods, if you take that all away, this is some fucking amazing acting that happened in this episode. It's brilliant. The role play was brilliant. The setup was brilliant. I'm excited for the story. The only thing that I wasn't a big fan of was at the beginning of the entire thing, there was like a bunch of abstract ideas that are hard to wrap your head around, which is the point of this sort of this race or of light beings that are in like a fourth dimension, which is what it felt like. So it makes sense, but I wasn't a fan of like the audio shift they did whenever they would say each other's names, because they said each other's names a lot, and then there was like an audio shift. So I wasn't a big fan of that. But aside from that small critique about like the beginning with the audio distortion, I really loved this episode. There was some fast talking from Brennan, but I'm gonna get used to that as time goes on, I think, because I did initially for Calamity. So I'm very excited for what happens, because we know, much like Calamity, we know where this is meant to end. And getting there is going to be the fascinating part. I question if the players will be turned and swayed by the betrayer gods, or if the betrayer gods are just going to stab them in the back and be like, we need to blow this shit up. Like, we can't allow you guys to let these people to live, so we're going to betray you, like our name implies, and bam. And honestly, I think that makes more sense than anything. Like, the prime deities are like, okay, you know what? We've done our job here. We've destroyed this thing. We've made sure they can't send out the signal. No one will get the plans again. It's over. We're good. And then the betrayer gods go, fuck that. These people are bad. Time to blow this shit up. And that alone calls off the truce would be really interesting. And it would make Aor the battlefield of where the truce ends. And that is why Aor gets sent into the ground. Honestly, I kind of love that idea. I hope that happens. But anyway, that is today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys, I hope that cleared things up, basically. I hope some of the questions that you might have been cleared up with this video. So yeah, I will see you guys on Friday for the recap of episode 100 or part 2 of Downfall. So see you then. Peace.